Welcome to the today's session, that is that the groundwater. Everyone having needed for to that basic two eminents. That is that one is the air, another one is the water. So in the latter process we require for the food. So these three are the basic eminents for survival of any living things. As a humans, as a animals, so three predominant bodies will be required to that. So before going to that groundwater, so without air we can survive to that a few minutes. Without food we can survive to few weeks. And without water we are unable to survive a few hours. So this is the importance of to that water. So today we'll be discussing to that in detail groundwater. So before going to the groundwater, we know about to the definition of groundwater. So which are the water occurrence to that beneath the earth surface, earth subsurface, we call it as groundwater. So basically groundwater major occurrence to that, so that is called rainwater. So rainwater will be percolated in the voids, gaps will be occurring in the different rock masses and different soils. It will be process, we call it as infiltration. So that is the availability of water, so that's we call it as groundwater. So whichever the water will be occurrence in the subsurface, so that we call it as groundwater. So for example, if you see into that upper layer 0.8 kilometers of the water, all of the lakes and rivers will be identified to that in the groundwater. The major source of groundwater, so that is no doubt at all to that, that is the rainwater. Any occurrence of water, major source is to that rainwater. So whether it is availability of water in that surface and subsurface, so that is a major primary source, is called it as rainwater. And hydrological cycle. So hydrological cycle is that followed as a natural phenomena. So while we will be precipitating to that understanding of any water in that surface region or subsurface region, occurrence of any water, so based on the process, hydrological cycle will be major role will be created to that. So hydrological cycles means they form as a natural phenomena. So there is no man-made occurrence to is there. So why? Because of this cycle will be followed to that natural phenomena. So in that hydrological cycle, some parameters we have to consider. So any one parameter will be naturally changes to that. It will be affected of precipitation. It will be cause of low rainfall in the particular regions. So this is about to that rainfall. Hydrological cycle. In that hydrological cycle, different parameters is there. So that's will be that precipitation. So precipitations means when the clouds will be formed. So due to evaporation, due to transpiration, due to condensation, the rain will be precipitated into that hilly regions. Whichever water will be precipitated in the hilly regions, the water will be traveled to the downward movement. So it will be called as surface runoff. So either it is a melting of snow and the precipitation of rain, it will be flow down to that by gravitational movement. It will be called as runoff. The surface runoff water, some water will be measured into that different likes of lakes and rivers, and some water will be infiltrated. So the infiltrated water we call it as groundwater. The surface water will be moves on and finally goes from rivers, different canals to rivers to, and finally merged into that sea. So before merging to that sea, the different process will be occurring to that evaporation. The evaporations means the water will be evaporated, so the solids will be formed as clouds. So this process we call it as evaporation. The process of formation of clouds, in that the water will be vapored to liquid to solid state. So that's we call it as evaporation. Another process we call it as a transpiration. So transpiration means every infiltrated water, the every tree is having some roots, the roots carrying to the water to that root to up to leaf level. So for example, if you see into that this particular image, the roots having some water content, the water content up to carry to the leaves. so the leaves will be transpirated. It will be another form of formation of clouds. This particular process we call it as transpiration. So transpiration means when the roots having some water, the water will be carried to up to leaf level. So this leaf level will be transpirated to that. By process we call it as transpiration. So transpiration, another phenomena, form as clouds. And third one is to that condensation. So condensation is in the atmosphere, the liquid to solid state, form as to that clouds. So in the simple example to that, in our home, everyone having to the different types of fridges. In that fridges we kept into the bottles. After taking to the bottle, the water having to some condensation forms. The vapor like material will be absorbed in that bottle. So that's this type same phenomena will be occurring to that by process of condensation. So these three process by forming of clouds. So this is the balancing of to that hydrological cycle. In that hydrological cycle, so any point of time, so disturbances of environmental changes, so disturbances of climatical changes, we are unable to occurring of a proper rains into that environment. So why? Because of the natural phenomena, the hydrological cycle will be imbalanced. So because of various reasons. So for example, deforestation is another reason of the low rainfall, and the cyclic of process we are able to identify to that by the process by cutting of trees, the vegetation will be not developed, the clouds will be not developed because of the less vegetation. So that is the best example in our Andhra Pradesh. The few states are having few districts having some low rainfall content. So that is the example of low vegetation. So for example, that is through that in the Kadapa and Kurnool area. So in the every year we have find out to that low rainfall data. So because of hydrological cycle will be imbalanced in that those areas. So evaporations means when the water will be formed as to the liquid to gases. When the water liquid to a gaseous state in the particular area, it will be called as evaporation. So these are the evaporation based on to that energy conditions. Because of energy conditions means when the sun, so due to major energy is that sunlight is a major energy. See, the process will be going on to that evaporation. Whether it is the sunlight is there, so definitely evaporation will be occur. So again the formation of clouds and precipitate to that rainwater. And transpiration. So transpiration means when the trees or plants having some roots, so the root carry to the up to leaves this water, it will be gives us to the transpiration. So this transpiration another process forming as the clouds. Then clouds will be formed, again the rain will be precipitated to that. So condensation means when the atmospheric places the liquid to gaseous state, formation conditions will be form as clouds. This process we call it as condensation. That is the, for example, is that in the water bottles. So water bottles were having to some vaporization of after cooling. So the vapor will be called it as form as clouds. That's the process we call it as condensation. So precipitations means after formation of clouds, definitely in the particular point of time the water will be precipitated towards the gravitational movement towards to the earth surface. That process we call it as a precipitation. So on an average for a year, so always to that 920 mm 980 mm watt of rainwater will be precipitated to that on an average to that in our India. So runoff means which are the water will be precipitated. So for example, if you consider to that this is the hilly area, the rain will be precipitated. So these precipitation rain will be different channels. So either it is a small canals, either it is the rivers or lakes. So in the runoff places will be flow down to the towards gravitational movement. So these particular flow we call it as runoff. So these runoff channels measured into that major rivers, so major lakes, and finally sea. It means the flowing of water in that elevation places to low lying area are in the different measured into the different canals, are measured into that rivers, are measured into that major seas. So this process we call it as surface runoff. Flow of water we call it as runoff. And another one is that occurrence of groundwater. Occurrence of groundwater, everyone dependent to that groundwater. Basically we know about to that where which place is the suitable zones is there in that subsurface area. In that phenomena we know about to that where the exact water is available. For example, many hilly areas, major people will be depending on to that groundwater only. So because of the practices to that agriculture practices is done only for that depending on to that groundwater. So unknowingly or unknowingly they can dig a borehole in that particular regions. After some days the water not available in that particular boreholes because of the particular zone is not suitable for groundwater. So based on the reasons, so groundwater is divided into occurrence of groundwater divided into 3 zones. So one is that zone of aeration. So if you seen into that the groundwater will be differentiated to that this is the surface area, this is the some zone of aeration. So this is the zone will be the capillary fringe. So this is the saturated zone. Occurrence of groundwater is divided into 3 zones. So what is that? Zone of aeration, another one is the capillary fringe, another one is the zone of saturation. Zone of aeration means when the rainwater will be precipitated into the earth surface, the water will be moves on by gravitational movement in that infiltrated in the subsurfaces. By gravitational movement the water will be infiltrated. So that particular water will zone will up to topmost layer we call it as to that place we call it as zone of saturation. In that zone having partially filled with partially water, filled with partially air. In this zone partially filled with water, partially filled with air. So this zone we call it as zone of aeration. So many people are lack of awareness, they dig a borehole in the particular region. After some days there is no water availability this in zone. So the huge economic loss will be occurring. So those farmers will be cried on to this particular process, efforting of money and up to in the hilly regions up to 4 to 5 lakhs. So because of there is no water in after some time. So it is the reason behind to that. So the particular zone we call it as saturated zone. Why? Because of saturated means aerations means the zone we call it as partially filled with water, partially filled with air. So that's why after some days there is no water to here. So that is will be aeration. And intermediate zone we call it as intermediate zone we call it as capillary fringe. So capillary fringe means in between. For example, this is the aeration zone. So this is the saturated zone. In between zone will be called as capillary fringe. So capillary fringe means so in this particular zone having some voids. So there is a intermediate between to that aeration and saturation zone. In particular voids the water will be moving on to that up to saturated zone. Up to saturated zone. This particular zone will be called as capillary fringe. So capillary fringe means in between the aeration zone and saturation zone. In that capillary zone having some voids, the water will be percolated up to saturated zone. And also above layer also we call it as that water table line. So this is the water table line is the imaginary line. This particular imaginary line will be changes to that area wise and soil type wise will be varied to that. For example, in the deltaic region, so they have the sediments will be loose unconsolidated sediments. The water table line up to 5 meters. If you same line will be we consider to that hilly regions, it will be goes on to that 100 to 200 meters. So why? Because of the based on the soil conditions, the line will be differentiated. So this is about to that water table. So water table line will be called as imaginary line. This will be differentiated or changes between to that area wise or soil type wise. And finally, zone of saturation. So zone of saturation means freely available of water in this particular zone. The entire zone will be filled with fully in water. So the zone will be up to form as up to bedrock. Whichever the area is the strongest bedrock is there. So this particular zone we call it as zone of saturation. Zone of saturation means the in this particular zone having freely availability of water is there. This is up to bedrock. So why? Because of bedrock is there, the in that bedrock the water cannot to move in the downward movement. Because of the hard terrain area, rock is there, definitely up to surface area the water will be moves on to that, fluctuated to that in the availability of water in that saturated zone only. So based on the occurrence of groundwater is the three types. One is the zone of aeration, another one is the capillary filling, another one is the saturated zone. In the saturated zone, most of the water is available in that, freely available in that water. Why? Because of in the bottom layer is that hardest rock material is there, hardest bedrock is there. The water cannot to move in that downward direction. So whether it is the people are knowing to that as a geologist, as a civil engineer, they can know about to that occurrence of groundwater if you give in that borehole points in the particular regions up to saturated zone. Because of in that saturated zone the water is the freely available to that. So this is about to that. So this is the so this is about to that occurrence of groundwater. So when the farmers will be always depends on to that major source of agriculture practices, also what much more water is required to that. So many hilly stations, so those people are requiring for to that, are depending to that in the boreholes. So that the people having the proper knowledge in that occurrence of groundwater, they dig a borehole up to saturated zone. Definitely the water will be available in that 365 days and throughout to that period of crops, and availability of water will be much more to that occurrence of whether it is understanding of groundwater. So this is about to that groundwater and hydrological cycle and occurrence of groundwater. So those three topics will be covered in the today's session. Thank you.